The compound was packed. Chairs lined up in neat rows, canopies stretched from one end of the yard to the other, and the smell of jollof rice and grilled meat drifted through the air. But nobody was really looking at the food. They were looking at the two men standing at the gate. One arrived in a Ferrari so red it looked like it had been dipped in blood. The engine alone silenced half the crowd. Doors lifted up instead of out, and when Chidinma stepped down in her cream lace gown, gasps rippled through the guests like wind through grass. The other man came on a donkey. An actual donkey. Gray, tired-looking, plodding slow through the dust while children ran alongside it, laughing, pointing, some even recording with their phones. "Aha, is this a joke?" Someone muttered from the back row. Adiz stood by the gate in a simple white dress, her hands folded in front of her, watching the donkey approach like it was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. If anything, there was a small, quiet smile on her face, the kind of smile people mistake for foolishness when it's actually something else entirely. Her father, Chief Okonkwo, sat under the main canopy in his red cap, his face tight with the effort of not showing what he was feeling. Beside him, his wife leaned over and whispered just loud enough for the women nearby to hear. I told you this girl would shame us." Chief Okonkwo said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the gate, on the donkey, on the man now dismounting it. A lean, dark-skinned man in a plain white kaftan, no jewelry, no watch, nothing that announced wealth or status. Just a calm face and steady hands. His name was Obinna. Across the yard, Chidinma's husband-to-be stepped out of the Ferrari like he owned the sunlight itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's houses. He waved at the crowd like a politician, and the crowd, hungry for anything shiny, waved back, cheering, clapping, already comparing. "See as Chidinma don blow," a woman said, fanning herself with her asoebi fabric. "Ferrari for wedding day. God has been good to that girl." "And this one," another woman said, nodding toward Adiz. "She carried donkey come. Donkey. For her own wedding." Laughter spread. Not loud laughter. The cruel, contained kind. The kind that hides behind polite smiles and side eyes. The kind that cuts deeper because nobody says it directly to your face. Adiz heard every word. She always did. But she kept her eyes on Obinna as he crossed the compound toward her. Unbothered, unhurried. Like the whispers were just wind passing through leaves. "You don came," she said softly when he reached her. "I told you I would," Obinna replied, taking her hand. "Donkey and all." She almost laughed. Almost. Because underneath the joke, underneath the calm, there was something in his eyes, something careful, something guarded, that made her wonder, not for the first time, what exactly her husband was choosing not to say. At the high table, Chief Okonkwo finally spoke, his voice low and bitter, meant only for his wife. 2 daughters. One will ride in a Ferrari for the rest of her life. The other is starting her marriage on a donkey's back. He shook his head. "Where did I go wrong with this girl?" His wife patted his hand, though there was no comfort in it. "Some people choose poverty, my husband. We cannot help her if she refuses help." Neither of them noticed Obinna glance toward the road behind him, toward a black car parked quietly at the far end of the street, engine off, windows tinted, waiting. Neither of them noticed the driver inside dip his head respectfully the moment Obinna's eyes met his. Nobody noticed. Except Adiz. She had noticed it 3 weeks ago too. And every time she asked him about it, Obinna would smile that same calm smile and say, "Not yet. Trust me a little longer." Today, watching her sister's Ferrari gleam under the afternoon sun while her own husband stood in the dust beside a donkey, she decided she'd trusted long enough. "Obinna," she said quietly, as the priest began calling the families forward. "Whatever this secret is, I hope you tell me before this family finishes burying me alive with their eyes." He looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or grief, or both. "Soon," he said. "I promise you. Soon. Everyone in this compound is going to understand exactly who they laughed at today." The priest called their names. The crowd quieted reluctantly, curiosity beginning to outweigh mockery. And somewhere behind the tinted windows of that parked black car, a phone began to ring. The priest raised his hands and the compound settled into something resembling silence. though it was the kind of silence that still buzzed underneath, full of side glances and muttered commentary that refused to fully die down. "We are gathered here," the priest began, "to join two lives, two families, two destinies." Chidinma's wedding was scheduled for the same afternoon, just 2 hours later in the same compound. Their father's idea, a double blessing he'd called it when he announced it months ago. Privately, everyone understood the real reason. He wanted the comparison. He wanted the whole town to see, side by side, which daughter had chosen wisely and which had chosen foolishly. Now, sitting in the front row in his agbada, he wasn't so sure anymore he wanted the comparison at all. Something about the way Obinna carried himself unsettled him. A poor man should look nervous standing before a crowd like this. He should look small. Instead, Obinna stood with his spine straight and his hands folded, watching Adiz with the kind of focus that made the chief's stomach tighten without knowing why. "Adiz Okonkwo," the priest said. "Do you take this man?" "I do," she said, before he even finished the sentence. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd again, this time softer, almost affectionate, the kind reserved for someone people think is naive but harmless. "She never even let the man finish," someone whispered. "Poverty don't make her desperate." Adiz's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn around. Obinna's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles, a small steadying gesture. "Obinna," the priest continued, "do you take this woman, Adiz, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Obinna said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Something about it made a few people stop whispering. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, and the crowd offered its polite, lukewarm applause, Chief Okonkwo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, intending to ignore it, until he saw the name on the screen. Barrister Yuzo, Land Registry Office. He frowned and stepped away from the canopy, phone pressed to his ear, missing the moment his younger daughter kissed her new husband for the first time as his wife. "Chief," the voice on the other end said, tight with confusion, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "What is it?" "The land dispute case. The one your company has been fighting for 3 years over the Eastern Warehouse property." Yes, what about it?" "The new owner just filed to formally take possession. I have his documents in front of me right now." A pause. "Chief, are you aware the new owner's name is Obinna?" Chief Okonkwo's hand went still around the phone. "Say that name again." "Obinna, 32 years old. He purchased the entire warehouse district 8 months ago through a holding company. I only just connected the paperwork to a name I recognized because..." The barrister hesitated. "Because I heard your daughter is marrying a man with that same name today." The chief turned slowly, his eyes finding his new son-in-law across the compound. The same man in the plain kaftan, the same man who had arrived on a donkey, now standing quietly beside Adiz while distant relatives took photographs nobody would ever want to look at again. "That's impossible," the chief said, though his voice had lost its certainty. "That man came here on a donkey." "I don't know anything about a donkey, Chief. I only know what's on these documents. And what's on these documents is that the man who now owns the property your entire business depends on is your new son-in-law." The phone nearly slipped from Chief Okonkwo's hand. Behind him, the celebration continued, oblivious. Chidinma's Ferrari gleamed in the sun. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of chilled drinks. Somewhere, a live band began tuning their instruments for the second half of the day's festivities. And across the yard, Obinna caught the chief's eye for just a moment, one long deliberate moment, before offering him a small respectful nod. The kind of nod a man gives when he already knows exactly what the other man has just learned. Adiz noticed the exchange. She followed her father's stricken expression to her husband's calm one, and a cold understanding began to settle in her chest. "Obinna," she said quietly, gripping his arm. "What did you do?" He turned to her, and for the first time all day, the calm in his eyes cracked just slightly, replaced by something rawer, tired, careful, afraid of her reaction. "I told you," he murmured. "Soon. I just didn't think soon would be today." Before she could ask anything else, a commotion broke out near the gate. 2 men in dark suits stepped out of the black car that had been parked down the road, walking briskly toward the compound with folders tucked under their arms. Every head turned. The whispering crowd, so busy comparing donkeys and Ferraris all morning, suddenly went quiet for an entirely different reason. Which one of you is Chief Okonkwo? The taller of the two men called out. The chief's mouth went dry. I am. What is this about? The man held up a folder. We're here regarding the Eastern Warehouse acquisition. Your legal team was notified this morning, but we were told you'd be here, so we came directly. There are documents that need your signature by end of day. Whose documents? The chief demanded, though some part of him already knew. The man glanced toward Obinna, standing quietly beside his new bride, and answered without a trace of doubt. Mr. Nweeks, sir. Your daughter's husband. The crowd erupted into a storm of murmurs. Chidinma, standing near her Ferrari in her cream gown, turned sharply toward her father, confusion and something like fear crossing her face for the first time all day. Adiz simply looked at Obinna, waiting. You own the warehouse, she said slowly. The one my father's whole business runs out of. Obinna exhaled, long and slow, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying for months. I own more than the warehouse, Adiz, he said quietly. And I think it's time I told you everything. Adiz pulled Obinna away from the crowd, past the canopy, past the whispering aunties and the confused waiters, into the quiet shade behind her father's house where the noise of the celebration became a distant hum. Talk, she said, arms crossed, though her voice shook slightly. Now, before I go back out there and stand beside a man I apparently don't know at all. Obinna leaned against the wall, rubbing a hand over his face. For the first time since she'd met him 8 months ago, he looked genuinely unsure of where to begin. My father used to work for your father, he said finally. Adiz blinked. What? 20 years ago. Before you were old enough to remember the workers who came and went. My father managed the warehouse logistics for Okonkwo Trading Company. He was good at his job. Loyal. Honest. Obinna's jaw tightened. Too honest as it turned out. What does that mean? It means he found out your father was falsifying import records, underreporting shipments, dodging tax, cutting corners that put other people's contracts at risk. My father confronted him privately, gave him a chance to correct it quietly. Obinna's eyes darkened. Instead, your father had him arrested, claimed my father was the one stealing from the company, planted evidence. My father spent 4 years in prison for a crime he never committed. Adiz's hand went to her mouth. Obinna. He came out broken. Lost his health in there. We lost our house. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep me in school. I watched my father die a slow death of shame and sickness, still insisting he was innocent, while your father built his empire on the very warehouse contracts my father used to run honestly. The compound noise felt very far away now. So this is revenge, Adiz said quietly. This whole thing. Meeting me. Marrying me. It was never about. No. Obinna stepped forward, taking her hands before she could pull away. That's what I need you to understand. Started as something else. I won't lie to you, when I first learned who you were, when I first saw you at your cousin's engagement party 2 years ago, some ugly part of me thought about using you. Getting close to your family. Finding a way to expose your father, to make him pay for what he did. And then I actually got to know you. His voice softened, and the mask of calm control finally slipped away completely, leaving something rawer underneath. You weren't like them, Adiz. You gave your food to the security guards when your sister mocked them for eating late. You defended the house help when your mother screamed at her over a broken plate. You told me once you dreamed of opening a free clinic in your grandmother's village. Not because it would look good, but because you remembered watching people walk 2 hours for medicine that never came. Adiz's eyes filled despite herself. I fell in love with you before I ever figured out what to do with the truth about your father, Obinna continued. And by the time I realized I loved you, I didn't know how to tell you any of this without you thinking I only came into your life to destroy it. So the donkey, Adiz said slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, half a laugh escaping despite the heaviness in her chest. The donkey was what, a disguise? A faint, tired smile crossed Obinna's face. Partly pride. I didn't want your family thinking I was trying to buy my way into acceptance with money I built from the very warehouse your father once used to ruin my family. I wanted to come to you as myself. No performance. No competing with your sister's Ferrari. He paused. And partly, I suppose, old habit. My father used to say a man who arrives quietly leaves loudly. I wanted your family to underestimate me, at least until I decided what I was going to do with everything I'd built. And what have you decided? Obinna was quiet for a long moment. The sounds of the wedding drifted faintly around the corner of the house. Laughter, clinking glasses, the band beginning to play again as if nothing at all had shifted beneath the surface of the day. I bought the warehouse district 8 months ago, he said, quietly, through a holding company, before I even worked up the courage to approach your father directly about a formal deal. Your father's entire trading business operates out of those buildings on a lease that's been due for renewal for the last year. He's been stalling the renegotiation, hoping to find a legal loophole to avoid paying the new market rates. And now you own it. Now I own it, Obinna confirmed. Which means, as of this morning, your father's entire business is standing on land that belongs to me. Adiz stared at him, a dozen emotions crossing her face at once: betrayal, understanding, love, fear, and something that looked almost like awe. What are you going to do? She whispered. Before Obinna could answer, footsteps rounded the corner of the house. Chief Okonkwo stood there, his red cap slightly askew, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shade, his earlier arrogance replaced with something far more fragile. Obinna, he said, his voice strained in a way Adiz had never heard from her father before. We need to talk. Man to man. Obinna turned to face him slowly, and for the first time all day, the quiet donkey-riding stranger the family had mocked all morning looked every bit like a man who held every card in his hand. Yes, Chief, Obinna said evenly. I think it's long overdue that we did. Chief Okonkwo led Obinna to the small back office he used for private business calls. The same room Obinna knew, where contracts had once been signed condemning an innocent man to prison. The irony wasn't lost on him. The chief sat heavily behind his desk, no longer the commanding man who'd spent all morning comparing his daughter's husbands like livestock at a market. He looked, for the first time, like what he actually was underneath the agbada and the red cap. An old man afraid of losing everything he'd built. Say it, the chief said. Whatever you came here to say. Say it plainly. Obinna remained standing. My father was Emeka Nweke. The color drained from the chief's face completely. He knew the name. He'd spent 20 years trying to forget it. He didn't steal from you, Obinna continued, his voice steady but not unkind. He found your falsified records and gave you a chance to fix them quietly. You destroyed him instead. He died believing he'd failed his family, when the truth was he refused to fail his integrity. The chief's hands trembled on the desktop. I was young, desperate. The business would have collapsed if the truth came out. I'm not here for your excuses, Obinna said, though gently. I spent years planning what I'd do if I ever stood in this room. I imagined taking everything from you, watching you lose the business the way my father lost his freedom. I bought that warehouse district specifically so I could one day walk in here and tell you your empire belonged to me. Then do it, the chief said, some of his old bitterness surfacing even now. Take it. Ruin me if that's what you came for. I'm not going to ruin you, Chief. The old man looked up, confusion cutting through his fear. I fell in love with your daughter, Obinna said simply. And somewhere between planning your downfall and standing beside her at that altar today, I realized my father wouldn't have wanted this from me. He never once, in all his suffering, asked me to become a man who destroys people for the sake of settling old scores. He raised me to be better than the people who wronged him. He reached into his kaftan and placed a folded document on the desk. This is a new lease agreement. Fair market terms, nothing punishing, nothing designed to bleed you slowly. Your business stays exactly where it is. You'll pay what any other tenant would pay, no more, no less. The chief stared at the paper like it might be a trick. Why? After everything I did to your family? Because revenge would have made me exactly like the man who ruined my father, Obinna said quietly. And because your daughter taught me, without even knowing she was teaching me anything, what it actually means to have character. She never once bragged about her family's wealth. She never mocked people with less. She chose me on a donkey over her sister's Ferrari without blinking, because she never cared about the donkey or the car in the first place. He paused. I don't want to build my marriage on the foundation of your ruin, Chief. I want to build it on something my father would have been proud of. Outside, the wedding celebration had grown restless with rumor and speculation. But nobody outside that small office knew yet what had truly been decided within it. When Obinna and the chief finally emerged, Adiz searched her husband's face anxiously, and found something there she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not anger, but peace. Chief Okonkwo walked to the center of the compound, raised his hands for quiet, and for the first time all day, the crowd actually listened. "I owe this family an apology," he said, his voice rougher than usual. 20 years ago, I destroyed an innocent man to protect my own failures. Today, his son had every right to destroy me in return. Instead, he showed me mercy I never showed his father." He looked toward Adiz, tears gathering unashamed in his eyes. "My daughter did not lose today by marrying a man on a donkey. She won. She saw a man's character when the rest of us only saw his transportation." A heavy silence fell over the compound. The same people who'd whispered and laughed all morning now had nothing to say at all. Chidinma, standing near her Ferrari, looked at her sister with an expression that had shifted from pity to something like quiet shame. Later that evening, when the celebrations resumed with far less mockery and far more reflection, she found Adiz near the gate. "I'm sorry," Chidinma said simply, "for laughing. For all of it." "You didn't know," Adiz said, and meant it. "Neither did you," Chidinma pointed out. "You married him without knowing any of this. Without knowing about the warehouse, the money, any of it." Adiz smiled, watching Obinna across the yard, now surrounded by relatives who suddenly wanted photographs with him, all pretense of superiority gone. "I didn't need to know," she said. "I already knew who he was underneath everything else. The rest was just details." Months later, the warehouse district thrived under new leadership, worker conditions improved, wages raised. The same halls that once buried a good man's reputation now displaying his portrait in the main office. Obinna's quiet tribute to the father who taught him that character outlasts cruelty and truth outlasts shame. And in her grandmother's village, a modest clinic opened its doors for the first time, funded by a man once mocked for riding a donkey to his own wedding, standing beside the woman who never once needed a Ferrari to know exactly what she was worth. The lesson traveled far beyond that compound, whispered from household to household the way real stories do. That wealth wears many disguises, that pride often mistakes humility for weakness, and that the truest measure of a person is never the vehicle carrying them to the altar, but the heart carrying them through everything that comes after. The end.